10 years ago, I resigned from a job that made me completely and utterly miserable. I was so miserable that I used to lie awake at night, anxious and worried about it, sleepless, and I used to press my heart up against my husband's sleeping back and try and follow his breathing patterns and kind of absorb his calmness in a hope of being able to settle myself back into sleep. It didn't generally work very well, and I would get up in the morning feeling slightly sick with exhaustion and trundle into an office that made me feel completely desolate. It was in a basement, it had grey ceiling tiles, and my husband's question when I got home at the end of the day changed from "How was your day?" to "How many people cried today?" And the answer was very, very rarely zero. It was such a miserable experience that I thought desperately of ways to get out of it. And the best idea that I could come up with in my sleep-deprived, exhausted state was to have another baby as soon as possible. So I got quickly pregnant and took 6 months of maternity before weirdly returning and finally resigning in a sort of crisis after a long lunch with a friend who said, "You're utterly miserable and broken, get your coat and go home." And when I reflect on it now, I can't believe that it took me 2 years, over 2 years, to realise it wasn't the right place for me, because on the very first day that I went in, the Monday morning meeting was awful. The most senior person in the room belittled this woman that I'd met in interview who was charming and bright and dynamic and capable, and of course she resigned and went on to much brighter and better things. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time. All of this was brought back to me this week by the news of Amazon, which is apparently having a turnover crisis. 50 VPs have apparently resigned in the last year, and an email has leaked from the head of their, hold on to your breakfast, Momazonians, which is the group that represents mums with children. And in this email, she writes about her pride in some of what they've achieved, but her frustration in the lack of progress that has been made. She talks about a culture and a set of policies that sound to be pretty toxic, and talks about the relentlessness of work, the unnecessary, perhaps urgency, and the rate of burnout. It made me consider what I'd learned from my experience and what I think about it now. And when I look back on it, what I see is that I got caught in this toxic culture I dreaded going in, and yet I also got into a cycle of very black and white thinking, resign, stay, resign, stay. And I didn't know the question that I now know to ask, which Margaret Heffernan taught me, which is the most brilliantly useful question for almost any tricky situation, which is, what would you have done if you'd have done everything? And in the case of that work environment, I could have had better, more honest conversations with more senior people. I could have explored transfers. I could have asked about a sabbatical or changed to my working patterns. I could have got a coach to help me. I could have applied for other jobs. I could have done so many things before I let it go to a crisis where I pretty much just walked out. So my message today for anyone who is dreading going back to the office, for whom the return to more normal working lives is not in fact a bonus, is to really think through what you could do if you could do everything and work out what you can change. If you're a boss or a leader, however, that's looking at a culture and knowing that you have a real problem within it, now is the time to deal with it. There's research out from an organisation called Revelio Labs which indicates that a toxic culture may be 10 times more likely to lead to higher attrition than what people report their own pay rates as. Within the Great Resignation, can you afford to lose that many good people? Next week, we're going to be thinking about women in the pandemic. I heard from a board member this week who sits on a number of boards that are largely dominated by senior men, that many of them are thrilled by the impact that the pandemic has had on the lives of working women. So we're going to do a bit of analysis. Be back next Friday. Do get in touch if you've got thoughts, views, ideas, and/or share your news of a toxic culture. I'm very interested in hearing.